여러분 안녕하세요. 오늘 이렇게 만나게 되어 반갑습니다. 영국문화원은 재학생, 학부모님께 교육적이며 흥미 가득한 주제로 정기적인 웨비나 브리티시 토크로 찾아뵐 예정이며 오늘 첫 세션은 현재 지구에 살고 있는 전 인류의 당면과제인 기후변화에 대해 함께 생각해보고 우리의 액션을 나누기 위해 기획되었습니다. 특강이 진행되면서 생각나는 질문이나 의견이 있다면 마지막 질의응답 시간에 채팅창에 남겨주세요. 관련하여 이야기 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 오늘의 브리티시 토크 진행 순서입니다. 오늘은 폴 클레멘슨 주한영국문화원 원장님께서 직접 진행하시고 마지막 순서인 랩업 시간에 제가 질의응답을 포함해서 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 특강을 진행해 주실 폴 클레멘슨 원장님을 소개합니다. 폴 클레멘슨 원장님은 1994년부터 영국문화원을 대표하여 여러 나라에서 근무하셨으며 현재는 한국을 대표하여 주한영국문화원장으로 근무하고 계십니다. 클레멘슨 원장님의 부모님이 선생님으로 근무하셨던 싱가포르에서 자랐고 서세스 대학교와 런던의 소아스 대학에서도 공부하셨습니다. 홍콩과 이스탄불에서 영어 선생님으로 첫 커리어를 시작하였으며 이 사진에서 알 수 있듯이 뮤지션으로 잠비아, 아제르바이잔, 중국에서 기타리스트로도 활동하셨습니다. 화면에 보이는 이 사진이 아제르바이잔에서 찍은 사진입니다. 특히 중국 락의 아버지라 불리는 쿠이지안의 밴드에서 기타리스트로 활약하셨다고 합니다. 자, 이제 본격적으로 저희 원장님을 모셔볼게요. Paul, are you ready? It's your turn now.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction as well, for making me seem much more interesting than I actually am. This is going to be an interactive session, and to prove it, we're going to start with a couple of questions for you. First of all, we'd like to find out how you feel about the challenge of climate change. So we have a question for you, as you can see on the screen there. We'd like to find whether you believe that climate change is caused by human activity. So leave your comment on the chat box now. So that's a yes or a no. We can see some comments coming in there now. Don't be shy. Perhaps a little bit of reluctance to comment. I think you'll have the opportunity to feed into some questions later on, but I think what we can say is that climate change is real and it's happening. Whether or not it is man-made remains a controversial subject for some people. However, most scientists agree that change is happening at rates not seen before in recorded history, and most of them agree that human activity is the cause of that change. And you know, last year we experienced the hottest day on record by worldwide average temperatures. That was on Sunday, the 2nd of July, and that is to say the hottest day ever recorded. Until the day after that, which was Monday the 3rd of July, which was hotter than Sunday. And then, of course, you know where I'm going with this, Tuesday was even hotter again. Now, this is something that we really need to think about very, very seriously indeed. Let's have a look at what you think about another question. Don't be shy. Let's get a few more responses into this next question. You can see there, poll 2. How serious do you think climate change is for the future of the world? And you have a choice of 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, going from extremely serious to not serious at all. So put your comments in the chat and let us know what you think. Are we getting any replies in there? Have a think about that yourselves. It's an interesting question. I think we would get a range of responses. But what I can say is that most scientific opinion is that human-caused climate change is extremely serious for the future of the world, and it needs urgent action to avoid major catastrophe, really. We live in a big and complex and fast-changing world, and countries often find it difficult to cooperate with each other, even on issues they agree on. So most countries acknowledge that urgent action on climate change is needed. But political and economic and commercial influences often mean that it's hard to agree on whether and how to work together. We do know, though, that unless countries and people can find ways to cooperate internationally and work together on this emergency, then the future does look very dangerous for all of us. And that's why international organisations like the United Nations and cultural organisations like the British Council take our roles in climate change very, very seriously indeed. So, you can see here, the question is, what is climate change? Well, the first thing to remember is that it's not weather. Climate influences weather, and also climate change is sometimes called global warming, but global warming can cause weather events that include actually extremely cold weather. So if you hear someone saying that climate change isn't happening because it's colder than usual yesterday or today, then you need to explain to them the difference between climate and the weather. And climate is basically the average weather in a place over many, many years. Climate change is a shift in those average conditions. And the climate has fluctuated naturally throughout the world's history, but nearly all scientists say that there's no doubt that the particularly rapid climate change that we've seen over the past century is caused by humans. In particular, they say it's due to the widespread use of fossil fuels, that's coal and oil and gas, and that's in homes and industry and transport, and from some forms of agriculture as well, actually. And when fossil fuels burn, they release greenhouse gases. Most importantly of those is carbon dioxide, or CO2. And these gases trap the sun's heat in the atmosphere, and that causes the planet's temperature to rise. And scientists say that limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels is crucial to avoid the most dangerous impacts of climate change. Now, there are thresholds beyond which change they think could accelerate and become irreversible in different parts of the Earth's climate system, such as the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet. The 1.5 degrees Celsius came from the UN climate agreement in Paris in 2015. So it's part of an international agreement, and 174 countries signed up to it. There have already been some startling changes actually in climate measurements. It's not clear where the danger thresholds are all the time, and hard to say what thresholds have already been crossed. But what you can see here is a map of some pretty startling changes, some really surprising changes that have occurred in the oceans around the British Isles quite recently. You can see that the sea is suddenly much warmer than previous recorded years, as are many parts of the Mediterranean Sea as well. Why don't you also take a look at this video here? We'll play you a video that explains much more.
The planet's climate has constantly been changing over thousands of years. The global average temperature today is about 15 degrees centigrade. Scientists are worried that the planet is warming faster than ever before. The 20 warmest years on record have been in the past 22 years, according to the World Meteorological Organization. If this trend continues, temperatures may rise by 3 to 5 degrees centigrade by 2100. Scientists say we should try and stop this trend and not allow the average global temperature to rise more than 1.5 degrees. That even a 2 degrees centigrade rise would be bad for us all. Now, half a degree doesn't sound like much, but it could make a big difference to the planet. A 2 degrees centigrade rise would mean that all the coral reefs would disappear, but a 1.5 degrees centigrade rise means that there would still be some. Also, 18% of the insects on Earth will disappear if the temperature goes up by 2 degrees centigrade, compared to 6% disappearing at 1.5 degrees centigrade. 37% of people will be affected by dangerous heat waves at 2 degrees centigrade. That's twice the number compared to at a 1.5 degrees centigrade rise. Whether it's coral reefs, crops, floods, or the survival of species, scientists say everyone and everything is far better off in a world that limits the rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So what can we do? Scientists say that carbon will have to be sucked out of the air by machines and stored underground, and that these devices exist already. They also say that billions of trees will have to be planted. People should buy less meat. Of all the foods we eat, beef has the biggest impact on climate change because it produces a high amount of greenhouse gases. Also, some have suggested not buying new clothes too often because the fashion industry is a major source of the greenhouse gases that are overheating the planet. And of course, using transport that doesn't burn fossil fuels, like electric cars. It's even better to walk or ride a bike.
So you can see from that, it's pretty clear that different countries are going to be affected in different ways by climate change and the climate crisis. So it will be good now to understand how you feel about this for the future of this country, for the Republic of Korea. So we're going to ask you with this next poll what you think. And the question is, how serious do you think climate change is for the future of Korea? And again, you have the same range of options there, 1 to 5, from extremely to not at all. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, lots of number 1, extremely.
There's a few ones coming in there. Some 2s. Yes.
Mostly number 1.
Mostly number 1. Okay, yeah. That's not surprising given that a lot of you are young people and those are the concerns that you have and you think that it is extremely serious indeed for the future of Korea. That's the global challenge. As you can see here, we're going to switch to what the United Kingdom is doing to overcome that challenge at home and what it's doing with its international partners to do that. Now, in June 2019, the UK Parliament passed legislation requiring the government to reduce the UK's net emissions of greenhouse gases by 100% by 2050, relative to 1990 levels. Now, that would make the UK a so-called net zero emitter. And net zero isn't easy, and obviously it means lots of government initiatives. It means that business and transport have caps on their carbon emissions. It means that government help to switch UK businesses to cleaner energy sources is available. And it means grants and encouragement to households to install technology like low emission boilers and heat pumps and heat networks. It even means developing cutting edge technology like space-based solar power. Now, some would say that the UK targets should be more ambitious than that actually. And great care also has to be taken not to exacerbate inequalities and unfairly disadvantaged parts of UK society when making these changes. And frequent policy changes, of course, can also discourage long-term investment where it's needed. Let's have a look at COP26 now. As you can see, on the world stage, the UK also plays a major role on climate. Now, with the UK's COP presidency, we hosted the International UN-sponsored climate conference, the so-called COP26. That was in Scotland in 2021. And COP26, they say, helps to keep 1.5 alive. It allowed climate vulnerable voices to be heard from territories bearing the brunt of the climate emergency. And it also sustained the progress towards the agreement that we need to deal with the climate change issues from all parties, governments, the private sector, civil society, individuals. And lastly, the British Council were also there at COP26 in Scotland. Now, I guess you may be asking, why were the British Council there? And so what does the British Council have to do with climate change? Okay, let me say a little bit about that. This is what the British Council is for. We're in 100 countries worldwide, and here in Korea, you may know us for our English teaching, mostly, or for giving access to IELTS examinations, or for our work supporting higher education links between Korea and the United Kingdom. For our work with partners in arts and culture, you may also know us for that. Now, we've been doing this in Korea since 1973. So we had our 50th anniversary last year, which was great, a wonderful celebration. And a simple way of putting it, what we do is that we build connections and understanding and trust. So to find out a little bit more about the British Council, have a look at this video.
At the British Council, connections have always been at the heart of what we do. From a very first English class, to supporting high quality and inclusive education for all. Building partnerships to share expertise. Creating opportunities to learn and thrive. With the qualifications that transform lives. From creative collaborations that spark imagination and innovation. To sharing arts and culture with new audiences around the world. Breaking down barriers. Opening conversations. To help tackle the global challenges facing us all and supporting young people with the skills they need. Connecting the UK to the world. Working together, we can achieve so much more than we can alone. Building connections, understanding, and trust for a more peaceful and prosperous world.
So, it's all about building connections. And what has that got to do with the climate emergency? Well, connections and trust and international understanding are what we need to collaborate and cooperate on solutions to the climate emergency. And that's why the British Council were at COP26. And that's why we work in climate and in the environment. And also that's why we had our Climate Connection programme running alongside COP26. Take a look here. So that's some of the British Council's work worldwide on climate. But what about the British Council in Korea? Well, climate is definitely also a priority for us, as it is for people in Korea like yourselves. Because we work in arts and culture, we use arts to highlight the challenges and increase understanding of how serious the issue is. We work with the Korea Foundation. We bring together Korean and UK artists to work together on joint digital commissions on climate themes. So that brings together art and science and digital technology. Really interesting stuff. Have a look at this. So what else does the UK do in Korea on the climate emergency? Well, you may recognise some familiar faces from the next video. Prepare to be surprised.
안녕하세요. 주한영국 대사 컬린 크룩스입니다. 오늘 세계적인 K-팝 아티스트 블랙핑크와 함께 하게 되어 매우 기쁩니다. 블랙핑크를 소개합니다. 안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
여러분들이 COP26 홍보 대사로서 전 세계 팬들에게 기후변화에 대한 경각심을 일깨우고 나아가 지금 당장 행동할 필요성도 강조해 주셨습니다. 홍보 대사로 활동하면서 느낀 점은 무엇인지 말씀해 주실 수 있을까요?
네, 우선 저희를 이렇게 다시 한번 영국 대사관에 초대해 주셔서 너무 감사드리고요. 작년에 바로 이곳에서 저희가 COP26 홍보대사로 임명되었는데 이렇게 다시 오게 돼서 너무 기쁩니다. 저희도 많은 분들과 비슷하게 기후변화에 관심을 더 많이 갖게 된 것 같아요. 지구의 현 상태를 다룬 다큐나 저희 주변 지인분들과 함께 얘기를 나누면서 그리고 실제로 그 변화들을 몸으로 체감하고 사태의 심각성을 조금씩 더 알게 되었습니다.
기후 변화로 인해 이제 지구와 우리 모두의 미래가 위협받고 있다는 걸 알게 되니까 앞으로 어떻게 될지 걱정도 되고 두려운 마음도 느꼈었는데요. 저희도 배워나가야 하는 상황에서 뭐부터 실천할 수 있는지 또 어떻게 해야 할지 등에 대해서 가까이서 보고 듣고 알릴 수 있는 이런 좋은 기회가 생겨서 항상 감사하고 있습니다.
소감 정말 감사합니다. 리사 씨와 로제 씨는 대사관에 다시 오게 되신 소감이 어떠신가요?
네, 일단 너무 좋은 것 같아요. 작년에 2월에 왔던 것 같은데 올해도 이렇게 초대해 주셔서 너무 감사합니다.
여기는 저희가 기후변화에 대해서 많은 분들한테 의미 있는 메시지를 전달했던 첫 장소여서 저희한테는 좀 더 뜻깊은 것 같고요. 이렇게 다시 초대해 주셔서 너무 감사드리고 다음에 또 초대해 주세요.
네, 말씀 감사드립니다. 꼭 다시 함께 했으면 좋겠습니다. 앞으로도 지속 가능한 미래를 위한 좋은 영향력 많이 보여주시길 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
Isn't that great? I hope you enjoyed the UK ambassador's Korean language there. He has the best teacher, of course, because he's married to a Korean. But seriously, you can see how effective it can be when we use the power of fame and talent to highlight a problem. So often we see celebrities lending their influence to climate causes to put public pressure on those in power to take action. Now, we all know that responding to the climate emergency isn't just about governments. It's about people as well. It's about what we do as individuals, about what we do personally. And as we come to the end of our session today, I want you to think, what will be your commitment today to help solve this problem? What will you do differently? What are you already doing, maybe, to help respond to climate change? And again, I want to invite you to put your comments in the chat. And we'll use your comments to give us ideas and have a look at those ideas and maybe have a quick discussion, some questions shortly. Do put your comments in the chat and we can then have a look at some of them.
Oh yes, some of them mention about recycling.
Very important individual responsibility, and the Korean government has a very stringent approach to recycling, as we know.
Some of them like say they're just walking instead of riding cars.
Not always easy. It's quite dangerous to walk in Seoul, given how people drive.
To use as a disposable item.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycling.
I think one of the issues is sometimes as individuals it costs us more money to be green. than it would just to ignore the issue. It's a personal choice that often costs money, so that's what makes it a little bit more difficult. Well, that's great. So look, thank you very much for all your comments, and if there's any questions, I'll try to respond to them if you put them in the chat. And let me finally say that it's been a real pleasure to join you all today, tell you a little bit about what the British Council does in climate change, what the UK does as well, a little bit more about the problem as well. And do stay in touch with us here at the British Council. We have a lot to offer, and shortly you'll also hear a little bit more about our English language teaching offer. But thank you, it's been a pleasure.
자, 오늘 주제를 가지고 궁금하신 부분이 있다면 몇 개의 질문, 2-3개 정도 선정하여 질의응답을 가져보려고 합니다. 채팅창에 혹시 이 오늘 주제와 관련된 궁금하셨던 부분 있으시면 채팅창에 남겨주시면 감사하겠습니다.
So I'm going to choose like a couple of questions regarding this topic today.
That would be great.
All right. Okay, so let me choose the first question. Do you think new technologies will help with climate changes or destroy the climate changes?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I would say it depends very much on what kind of technology you're talking about. I mean, many feel that the only hope of stopping the dreadful, catastrophic changes threatened by climate change is actually developing new technology to replace, things like combustion engines and other sort of older polluting technology. But at the same time, you see a lot of kind of worrying new trends emerging actually through technology. So, for example, there's not a lot of talk about the climate impact of the rise of artificial intelligence. You're talking about, however, developing a lot of new hardware that needs cooling technology, computing resources that are all carbon emitting. And at the same time, of course, to complicate the issue, AI can also help to produce models and analysis that help to solve the climate challenge and climate crisis. So it's not a simple issue. I'd also say, the way in which we use technology and our environment is a political issue too. In London recently, there's been establishment of what they call ULEZ, ultra low emission zones. And that's been a very political question for a lot of people who live in those zones. As I said in the presentation, you can't expect the cost of climate change to be borne by only one group of people in society. It has to be seen to be an equal effort, an effort of everyone together. The question of technology and climate change is a very complex one, I think, and one that needs widespread debate and much more understanding.
Thank you. So we have another quite interesting question. Is it too late to stop global warming?
Yeah, because if it were, then what are we doing? It's Well, we have to say no. It is not too late. We have to have hope that we can resolve this. It's widely felt that we need to do a number of things at once urgently to stop the worst impact. One is to have binding international agreements to arrest further carbon emissions. That's absolutely imperative. I mean, another one, as we've just said, is to develop the kinds of technologies that help us to address this crisis by reducing emissions themselves, like heat pump technology. And, the streets of Seoul are filled with electric vehicles, which is fantastic, in a way that is not the case in many other countries. So that's a political choice and an economic choice. So, no, I would say it's not too late. Our own behaviour is also very, very important in this sense as well. If you have hope that you can resolve this issue, you should be considering, if you're travelling between two cities and you can take the train, instead of flying, should you not do that, even if it costs you a little bit more money? Or do we avoid buying supermarket products that are heavily packaged in plastic, even if they're a little bit cheaper than the alternative on the shelves? All these things are really important. I mean, finally, of course, there's the question of political will and political action. So the question for us as individuals is, should we switch our political allegiances to parties that have real commitments on the green agenda in their manifestos? Not necessarily Green Party, but it could be Green parties. Do we do that even where that manifesto includes things that we may not agree with? We may say that the green part of the manifesto is the important part and we vote for them instead. These are all really difficult issues, and all of them influence whether or not it is actually too late to stop global warming. I don't personally believe that it is, and I don't think the world can afford to believe that it is.
All right, thank you. And I believe lots of teenagers and students are here, so I'd like to choose for this one, for the last question. What is the role of youth in climate change?
The role of youth. Yeah, this again is it's a great question. It's also I find it quite a startling question because, and the reason I say that is because, you know, many young people, I think, yourselves who are joining us today, would protest that the role of youth in climate change is basically just to silently suffer the mistakes being made by people who are older than them, and that's not a good situation to be in. You know, young people who are now, like many of you at school, who aren't yet old enough to vote, are the people who need change now to avoid climate catastrophe, and anything that helps the collective voice on that to reach the decision makers is vital. And of course, there are some very high-profile young people already making their voices heard very loud. I mean, we all have heard of Greta Thunberg, for example, who began by leading school strikes in Sweden. But you know, even young people are targeted by the vested economic and political and financial interests, and often actually in a very vindictive way. You know, Greta Thunberg herself has suffered that too, you know, from a number of different sources. You know, I say all this because the most important role of youth, I think, in climate change has to be to find ways of being heard. Find ways of making your voice heard so that it starts to make political impact and starts to get some purchase on the issue, you know, because we're dealing with your future. This is not about the present of older people, it's about the future of young people. You need a voice, you need to be heard, and that's the main thing. And that's actually what we try to do at the British Council as well, to find ways of giving young people a voice on these issues so that they can be heard.
Alright, thank you for your answer. 네, 질의 응답은 여기까지 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 기후변화에 대응하는 우리의 자세와 영국문화원의 역할에 대해 폴 원장님께서 잘 설명해 주셨는데요. 기후변화와 환경 문제에 관한 주제가 영국문화원 수업에서는 어떤 방식으로 다루어지고 있는지, 그리고 그 주제를 어떤 방식으로 학생들에게 전달되고 있는지 그 내용을 잠시 살펴보려고 합니다. 지금 보이는 화면에는 초등학교 고학년이 배우는 프라이머리 플러스 5레벨 매거진 The Environment와 Course 오버뷰가 보이는데요. 학생들은 5주 동안 환경이라는 주제와 관련된 단어, 문법 등 언어를 학습하게 됩니다. 뿐만 아니라 환경 문제와 관련된 짧은 아티클과 영상 자료를 보며 환경 문제에 대한 넓은 사고, 나아가 학생과 본인이 속한 사회가 할 수 있는 해결 방안을 계획하고 발표함으로써 자신의 의견을 표현하는 활동을 하게 됩니다. 이와 같이 주제와 연결된 다양한 리터러시를 배우고 익히며 그 주제를 이해하는 과정을 통해 자연스러운 언어 발화는 물론 실생활 지식도 습득할 수 있습니다. 자, 그렇다면 수업 시간에 활용하는 매거진을 한번 살펴볼까요? 각 수업에는 명확한 학습 목표가 정해져 있습니다. 각각의 타스크와 프로젝트를 수행하며 주제를 보다 깊이 이해하고 관련된 영어 표현의 확장을 통해 자연스럽게 언어를 습득할 수 있습니다. 예를 들어 배우는 단어를 살펴보면 deforestation, drought, flood 등 환경 주제와 관련된 단어들을 배우고 활용하는 법도 배웁니다. 마지막 5주차에는 그동안 배운 내용을 활용하여 프로젝트를 수행합니다. 클라이메이트 체인지 캠페인을 만들고 더 나아가 세계 리더들 앞에서 환경 이슈에 대해 자신의 생각을 직접 연설해보는 수업입니다. 즉, 학생들의 참여가 주도적으로 이루어지는 수업입니다. 프라임 플러스 6 레벨에서도 얼반 리뉴얼이라는 주제로 재활용에 대해 배우고 쓰레기를 효과적으로 줄이는 방법에 대해 알아보는 수업을 통해 기후변화와 환경 문제에 대해 생각해보고 배워볼 수 있습니다. 또한 중등 프로그램인 세컨더리 플러스 A2 레벨에서도 Our Wonderful World 주제로 환경 문제에 대한 창의적인 해결책을 배워봅니다. 중등 과정 수업의 특징은 초등 과정에서 다뤘던 주제보다 더 넓고 글로벌한 개념을 다루며 학생들 스스로 사고하고 문제 해결을 위한 자료를 찾아 본인의 생각을 정리해서 발표하거나 논의하는 과정을 통해 영어 학습을 확장하는 형태입니다. B1.1 레벨에서는 Waste Not, Want Not 주제로 또래 10대 친구들에게 쓰레기 줄이는 팁을 공유한 블로그 작성글을 써보는 프로젝트를 수행해보거나 B2.1 레벨에서 배우는 The Price of Water는 환경과 물 절약이라는 주제에 대해 공부하고 학생들은 관련된 TV 광고 제작을 하는 프로젝트를 수행합니다. 학생들은 영국문화원 수업을 통해 다시 한번 환경에 대해 알아보고 해결 방안에 대해 스스로 고민하고 공부하는 시간을 가질 수 있습니다. 이와 같이 영국문화원의 수업은 단순히 영어만 배우는 수업이 아닌 학생이 살아가는 실제적인 사회와 지구촌 세계에 대비하는 실생활 시나리오, 경험에 초점을 맞추어 영어를 배우고 언어에 자신감을 가질 수 있는 수업 환경을 가지고 있습니다. 전문적인 교육 과정을 거친 검증된 교사의 수업을 통해 도전적이고 흥미로운 프로젝트 수업으로 자신감을 기르고 창의력, 리더십과 같은 21세기 핵심 역량을 배우며 미래를 준비할 수 있습니다. 자, 이제 오늘의 행사를 마칠 시간이 되었네요. 함께 클라이메이트 체인지라는 주제를 가지고 이야기할 수 있어서 또한 영국문화원에 대해서도 안내 드릴 수 있어 즐거운 시간이었던 것 같습니다. 여러분들도 뜻깊고 유익한 시간이었기를 바라며 이 시간 마치겠습니다. 저희 영국문화원의 활동이 궁금하다면 저희 웹사이트나 SNS를 방문해 주세요. 6월에 있을 다음 세션의 웨비나에서도 또 만나뵙기를 바라겠습니다. 감사합니다. Bye. Thank you so much for your time today.